Am I supposed to?
I've never used that.
Glad to have you today for another continuing piece of our professional learning series. I'm Jackie Rogers.
I'm Misty Higgins.
And we're professional learning coordinators, so we're really excited to especially be here today in this webcast talking about professional learning communities. So we're going to jump right into that, but before we do, I want to remind you that if you have any questions as we are going through this webcast today, you can always go to gosoapbox.com, and the password is KAS for Kentucky Academic Standards. So again, thank you for being here with us. Remember, as always, our webcasts are recorded and archived, and we'll send you a link to that as well. So today we're talking about why PLCs, understanding the importance of this vehicle to improve teaching and learning. And this is such an important thing that we're concentrating a lot on right at this moment. We just got test scores back. We have a lot of results. A lot of us have been thinking about, in all of our schools and districts, about what can we do to improve teaching and learning. And what we're trying to do in this role of professional learning coordinators is to offer the kinds of resources and supports to Kentucky schools really for that very purpose. And we know that PLCs is one of the very most effective ways to do that. So what Misty and I want to talk about today is why and also what makes it effective. Because sometimes we do things that might not really qualify as a good effective PLC, and we want people to be able to use their time very wisely and in a very good way. Our essential questions are, why is a PLC important in improving teaching and learning at all levels? And how can they support teacher clarity around the standards? One of the most important things we can do is be clear about what we want students to do. Misty's going to talk to you a little bit too about the book study we're doing, which is about this very thing, about clarity in learning and teaching and learning. We also have this 3-year plan that we keep putting in all of our webcasts because we want to remind you too that we do have, just like you're making plans on what you're doing to implement your standards to improve the student experience. We also have plans, and this is our 3-year look, an overview. This first year we're really focused on systems and structures that support standards implementation. Next year, so we've been working with the standards. Now we're talking about balanced assessment. So how are we going to know where students are before we start teaching, during teaching, and when we have various formative and summative assessments? And then how does that impact instruction, which is our 3rd year about instructional best practice?
And so what we really want to look at for the month of September, the structure we want to focus on to support standards implementation is that of the role of professional learning communities, or PLCs. And so what we want to do in today's webcast is we want to spend some time looking at why we believe that this is so important in helping support standards implementation, as well as the what of a PLC. And so if we start with the why, we always want to ground ourselves in the research. And so when you look at the research from John Hattie and Visible Learning, as well as psychologist Robert Marzano, in his book, What Works in Schools, they've identified 2 factors that can have a significant impact on student achievement. At the school and district level, that factor is access to a guaranteed and viable curriculum. And then when you look at a teacher level factor, it's actually looking at the quality of the classroom instruction. So if we know that those 2 factors are incredibly important in impacting student achievement, then we have to have a way to bridge the gap between the intended curriculum that the school or district has developed into what is actually being implemented into the classrooms. We need a way to bridge those 2 pieces together. And that is the purpose of a PLC. That's why they exist, is to bridge that gap. And if we go back to our last webcast, and we talked about the opportunity myth, and we know from that research, if we were to look from classroom to classroom in any school or across any district, we're going to see variation in what students are being asked to do and whether or not those tasks are actually even aligned to the standards or if they're grade level appropriate. And so when we have teachers working collaboratively in a professional learning community, we are helping to create more equitable learning environments for all of our students, increasing the chance that they are in fact being exposed to grade level assignments that are aligned to the standards. And then more importantly, or even as important as that, is that when you have PLCs truly in place in your school, then you have an opportunity for job-embedded professional learning. And we're going to talk about that a little bit throughout the webcast, but as the teachers are working together, they're honing in on what makes for effective practice based on the results that we're seeing from student performance. Those are just three quick samples of why PLCs are so important. And we could add a lot more to that list, but those are the 3 we really wanted to capitalize on in this particular webcast. But what we want to do now is look at what is a PLC. And it's interesting because it's one of those words that have been around for a really long time. And I think if you were to ask 10 different people, what is a PLC? I think you would possibly get 10 different answers. So what we want to do is ground ourselves in a common definition, a common understanding of what do we mean when we say professional learning community. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to go back to DeFore's work in Learning by Doing. And he defined a PLC as, I first want to look at just that first part, an ongoing process. So one of the common misconceptions I think about professional learning communities is that when we look at them, we think they're a program, just something we implement one year and then we move on. A process is not a program. This is the vehicle by which we do business in our schools to impact student achievement. So one thing we have to make sure we understand, this is the vehicle through which we are bridging the intended curriculum to the actual implemented curriculum in our classrooms. And then in the rest of the definition, he's going to go on to say what that work is that teachers are doing as a part of the process. He says it's when educators are working collaboratively in recurring cycles of collective inquiry and action research to achieve better results for the students that they serve. That's the work of a PLC. So I think another misconception we want to address is that any meeting when teachers are together, that is not a PLC. I think oftentimes we think when 2 or more educators are gathered together that we can call that a PLC. And in fact, the work is very specific of what happens in a PLC. And it doesn't mean that when teachers meet for other purposes that those are not important. They're very important, but we just need to make sure we don't call that our PLC. And so right now, Jackie's going to talk a little bit more about how we take this definition and look at the 3 big factors of a PLC or big ideas, as well as what are the driving questions of the work.
So if we take a look at these 3 big ideas of a PLC, you have focus on learning, this collaboration, and results. So this focus on learning, that always has to be where we are in all of anything that we do in a school. It's based on this belief, this fundamental purpose of a school is to ensure all students learn at high levels. I think if you ask anyone, they would say, yes, that is our belief, but belief is in the proof, right? Mm-hmm. So we believe something, we have to do and act on our belief. So this PLC would certainly have this focus on learning and show it by having actions that reflect that. The second big idea of a PLC is this collaborative culture and collective responsibility. I know I've worked in environments before where I feel like, a lone wolf or whatever, working there in my silo. But for this to be, and the research has shown that this is an effective way for us to work to better teaching and learning, is that we work together interdependently to impact our classroom practice. So we're trying to decide, for for instance, if things are aligned, if we are meeting what we need to be doing according to standards, how is that going? And we find that out through the results portion. So we have to be about results. We use evidence of student learning to inform our next move. So how are we going to change what we do to improve our practice and respond to individual students' needs? Sometimes students need intervention and sometimes they need enrichment. We have to remember all sides of that puzzle. How do we know where they are? So we're going to talk about those things today in a little more depth, because there are these major 4 questions of a PLC that really lead you to those big ideas. What do we expect our students to learn? How will we know if they've learned it? How are we going to respond if they don't? And how will we respond and enrich if they already know it? So that's really what we're going to be doing all the time in a PLC, and really trying not to waver from those 4 questions. Let's break down the first question a little bit. What do we want students to know and be able to do? Now, first of all, that's what we always say about the standards, is a standard is what you want kids to know and be able to do. So if we are working first from our standards, then we're starting definitely in the right place. What do standards expect of students? So it's one thing to pick a standard, but do we know all of the maybe discrete skills, the knowledge, the dispositions that students are going to need to accomplish that learning? That when we talk about scaffolding, that's a part of building that scaffold to success in that standard. The second question is, how will we know if they've learned it? So this is all about assessment. What evidence do we expect to see to determine if they've reached that learning outcome? We have to decide those things up front. And when we're doing that in a collaborative setting, first of all, we have more ideas, but we also understand we can talk those things through, and we can really solidify how we're going to identify needs or changes we need to make based on the assessment. Are we gathering evidence of student learning through team-developed common formative assessments? So that's another piece that would fall into that part of a PLC.
And I think, so the third question is, how will we respond if they don't learn it? But I think this is a good point to stop and address another common misconception of a PLC. I think a lot of times we view PLCs as a way to create cookie cutter teachers who we lose our teacher autonomy, and that is not the case in the true intent of a PLC. Because as teachers work together prior to the start of a unit to address what do we want students to know and be able to do, and how are we going to know if they've learned it, and we plan those common formative checkpoints along the way, then individual teachers go back to their rooms and design their lessons and instructions in a way that they want to do it. So you're not creating these cookie cutter teachers. But when we get to step 3, this is where there's a huge importance put on having trust within that PLC, because now we're going to analyze student results. And so when we bring those results to the table, this goes back to some of that job embedded professional learning, because one of the things we're looking to see is how do we use the data from these common assessments to analyze and improve our own classroom practice. So for example, with this one, let's say that Jackie and I are in a PLC and we're bringing back to the table the results from our first common assessment or common formative, and only 40% of my students were able to reach mastery. That is not a reflection of my students. That's a reflection on my teaching that occurred in the classroom. But let's say that Jackie's students, 95% of them were able to reach mastery on that common formative. Then we have to have enough trust as colleagues for me to say to Jackie, what did you do in your classroom? What instructional practices did you use that allowed your students to get those kind of results? So that can help inform my own practice. So that's that job embedded professional learning. And as we analyze that data, we're really digging into interventions. So how can we identify the students that need either additional time or support to be able to master those particular standards or that part of a standard? So here we're collectively working together and owning all of the kids. It's not just my kids, it's not just Jackie's kids, it's our kids together. And we're looking to see what are those supports that they need and what evidence-based practices could we use. Does that mean we use flexible grouping, or is it they just need additional time, or what is it additional scaffolding that they need? So we're working together to identify the students and then how we're going to address that need they have. In addition, not only are we looking at what do we do if they don't learn it, we have to respond to this question: what if they already have learned it? So how will we respond and enrich if they already know it? And this is where we get into that enrichment. And one thing within a PLC we need to think about is, prior to even beginning instruction, what are some ways we might pre-assess to see, are there any kids who already know what we're about to teach? And then collectively as a group, what are some ways that we can extend their learning that's still aligned to this content to help support and enrich what they're doing in the classroom as well. So we're not only looking at who needs additional support, but how can we extend and enrich the learning of those as they master the content. So those are the 4 big driving questions of a PLC. And just to reiterate what Jackie had said earlier, if teachers are not addressing one of these 4 questions, then they're not in a PLC process. And it doesn't mean that whatever the purpose for the meeting isn't important. It's just that this is the work of a PLC. So in our next webcast, we're going to actually hone in on just that very first question of the PLC. What do we want our students to know and be able to do? Because remember, this year is really about getting to know the standards. And so we want to look at how can we take the standards and really start addressing that very first question. And along with that, that plays into our virtual workshop this month. So our virtual workshop for October will be on October 24th. And really it's going to be the consultants going through a mock PLC and breaking down a standard and showing how you can use the different components that are within each of the CAST documents to really get an understanding of what this standard wants the students to know and be able to do. And we are continuing with the 2 different times, so we'll have that 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock Eastern sessions. And we're kind of learning as we go this year. So one thing we learned from our first virtual workshop last month is we think it's going to be easier if we have 2 different links. And so you will notice in all of our communications that we've updated that to show the link for each time. And again, both sessions are the same. We're just being flexible to the different needs and schedules around the state. So if you want to access those links to join us on the 24th, remember you can just go to kystandards.org, click on your standard resources, and then under general resources, you are going to click on the professional learning opportunities, and the very first thing that you will see is going to be the virtual workshops. When you click on it, if you scroll down, you will see the one for mock PLCs, and again with the updated links for the 4 o'clock session and the 5 o'clock session. So we hope that you will join us both next week or in 2 weeks for the webcast, and then again for that virtual workshop.
I think it's interesting to see that we are trying to keep all of the series together. So we're talking about PLCs, and we're going to do a virtual workshop that really focuses on PLCs. So we're looking forward to continuing that kind of learning. We had a really nice group of folks join us for our last virtual workshop. Please feel free. We can handle a lot of people, so please come and join us. And you're free to join either the 4 or 5 o'clock session. We would love to have you at either one or both. Now, I also want to tell you about a new opportunity that is also going to be of assistance when you're thinking about. We need at our school, our district, we need to really be doing some things maybe differently, adding some things, approaching things. And when I say things, I mean professional learning around the standards implementation. And really, isn't that what we're focused on anyway, is how do we better align our assignments, our curriculum to meet the needs of students according to how the standards, to what the standards ask them to do. So, just hot off the presses is a new MiniGrant for $10,000. So it should be very helpful in a budget when you're thinking about how do I do some things with professional learning. So the RFA is now out. You can find it on the KDE competitive grants page. If you Google those words, you'll find it very easily, but I've also added the link where it says page. It's a $10,000 grant. It's a mini grant to support professional learning. So your plan really has to be about professional learning around standards implementation. We're going to offer 52 awards. So we have a total award amount of $520,000. We're going to have technical assistance tomorrow at 10 o'clock. So I didn't put the time on there, but if you want to be a part of that technical assistance, we're going to talk more about the RFA. Please join me tomorrow at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. And the deadline to submit a proposal for this is on 10/28, so the end of October. I will give you a little heads up. This RFA, the proposal will actually be written in a 30, 60, 90, 180 day plan template. And many people are already very familiar with that template. So we think it'll be a very easy way to approach it, at least that side of it. You don't have to worry about a lot of narrative that normally comes along with maybe larger grants. We also like to end each of our webcasts with 5 things to know before you go. Again, we always encourage you to go to kystandards.org and subscribe to that page. When you do that, any updates we have, we'll send those to you when we get those. Though we do have webcasts the first and third Thursday. We have a schedule for those, and virtual workshops are the 4th Thursdays of the month. We also have a book study. I was telling you a little bit about that. It's on the book Clarity for Learning. You're still able to join, even though it's a little late, you're still able to join. It's pretty much a self-paced. Do you want to say anything about the book study? Misty's been leading that.
I will say we have over 300 educators across the state, which has been really nice. And as they're submitting their first month reflections, we have been so impressed by the insightful reflections that people are doing and how they're really digging into this work. And I think from what we're gathering is this was the perfect timing for that particular topic, as we're all trying to figure out what exactly these standards are asking of our students. And it's going to be interesting as we go through. And you can still join, please. It is self-paced. We can make it work if you still want to join us. And if you go into the KY Standards, if you look under professional learning opportunities, you can still see the link to sign up. So we encourage anyone who would select to join, feel free to do that.
You just need to buy your own book.
Yes, yeah, we're out of books at this point.
We are out of books. Also, a reminder that the virtual workshop for mock PLCs, and this is going to be focused on breaking down a standard, will be October 24th, 4 and 5 o'clock. And then the last one is a link to a survey where we'd really like feedback. We've worked pretty hard on our website. We keep trying to refine it and make it easier to use, and also a place where you can find all the resources you need. So if you don't care, you could take that survey for us, which would be very helpful in giving us some feedback.
And we did have a couple of questions that we wanted to address quickly. One was asking about how often should PLCs meet? And that's not just a simple one-word answer, because it's really how often do they need to address one of those questions of a PLC. So it's really looking at when do we have data to bring to the table to actually analyze. So it's really looking at where are they in the process of a unit, where do they need to meet prior to it. So I don't know that there's one easy answer. And I think as we look around the state, we have seen multiple models of how people do that. So there is no one right way to do that. It's just really looking at when is it they need to meet to address those 4 questions.
We had one other question about the virtual workshops. Are they being archived? So that's another thing that we're working out the bugs to. It's a little bit tricky, but yes, that is our goal to do that. For the very first virtual workshop, though, we have something we think is a little bit better than the video. It is a module that takes you through the alignment tools for reading, writing, and math. And it's very similar to the virtual workshop, but I think it'll actually work out a little better than watching that video. So we're going to offer that very soon. It'll be sort of what we call after fall break. So you'll be able to see those.
And we will just say to everyone, I mean, we are very much in a year of action research ourselves. We are playing around with a lot of different virtual platforms to see what is best meeting the needs of schools and districts. So just know more ideas are coming, more things we're going to try out. So we're really using this year to see how we can best meet your needs and which type of virtual platforms do that.
Right. So our goal, yes, is to record and make things available. If those don't work out very well, but that is definitely our goal, is to do that.
Yeah.
Well, we thank you for being with us today. Remember, you can find if you are now joining us, maybe for the first time in this professional learning series, you can always go back to kystandards.org if you wanted to start with some webcasts about the standards, maybe, because we have webcasts that get really specific there. If you're realizing by looking at your results that you really need to focus on a certain thing, you may begin with those webcasts. Also, remember, there are professional learning modules to really help teachers dig in deeply into their standards. So thank you for being with us.
And we know many of you are on fall break or getting ready to go to fall break, so we hope you enjoy that time off, and we will see you back in 2 weeks.